Okay, great. So I'm continuing a series that we started last week, and the series is on a paper called Revering and Relying on the Dharma. And in a way, you don't need to worry about that too much. It's kind of a way to give us a continuity to talk about, but all of the talks will stand alone. But last week, Kusalasara started by looking at views and how views kind of shape our experience. And the fact that there are positive or they're helpful views, views that will move us in the direction of freedom, of less suffering, and more towards a mind that's kind of wise and kind. So that's kind of why views are important. And throughout this series, we're going to be looking at views. Basically, we're going to be looking at what's the Buddhist perspective, and why does that perspective help us move in that direction. How does that help us move in the direction of freedom, which is basically what Buddhism is trying to do. It's trying to help us move our mind in the direction of freedom, in the direction of a Buddha. So we're going to look at a teaching today called the Niyamas. So that's the topic which we'll be looking at. And this teaching, it's a teaching that encompasses the whole of life, basically. So it helps us make sense of all reality on lots of different levels. So all the way from the law of gravity, all the way through to the arising of a Buddha, to the gaining of enlightenment. So it's a teaching that encompasses all of that. And it can also help us make sense of our own experience and how we need to practice. So it's a very full teaching, and it originated in the Buddhist tradition, so it goes back a long way. But also Sanghadharin, who founded this tradition, he also developed this teaching. So it's also a particularly unique teaching to this tradition as well. So it's both traditional and it's got some new developments in to try and make sense of it in light of the information that we have living now. So it's an important teaching because we live in a time that's very different to the time of the Buddha. So at the time of the Buddha, there wasn't any scientific knowledge in a certain way, and there wasn't much historical knowledge either. Their view of history is very different to ours, whereas we live in a time where we're completely soaked in like science, but also history. We kind of understand how things have evolved up to where we are now. So if we're living in that world, we need teachings that help us make sense of it in that way. And this is what the teaching, this is one of the ways that the teaching of the Niyamas helps us. So what the Niyamas does is it looks at different processes at play in the universe. So like I mentioned, it helps us understand things all the way from gravity all the way through to the arising of the Buddha. And there are different processes at play in the universe. And I'm going to go into kind of more technical names in the second half. But just to give you an overview now, the different processes there's basically physical and chemical processes. That's one layer of these processes they talk about. There's organic processes, kind of biological processes, instinctual processes, ethical processes, and then transcendental processes. Yeah, so I'll go over them again as we go through, but that's the kind of broad, they're the broad base of processes that it covers. So what we're going to start off is just going through, looking at basically the evolution of all life. How has all life emerged from a kind of modern viewpoint, modern historical viewpoint, as far as we know now, and looking at how these different processes have enabled that to happen. So we'll start. It's a very brief and basic overview, but it kind of gives us a shape of what happened. So we're going to start with the Big Bang. So the Big Bang was roughly 13.8 billion years ago. And it seems as if this is where our universe came into existence. And now Buddhism is very clear to say that actually there is no discernible point to when things began. There's no kind of point where you can say this is where it began. But it seems like this is where our universe came into existence, and that we currently can't look back further than that. With what we have available to us, we currently can't look further than that. And this is where physical processes began. So I said the first layer was looking at these physical and chemical processes. This is where these physical and chemical processes began. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about gravity, electromagnetism, thermodynamics, electrons, protons, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the first layer of reality, and that emerged when the universe came into existence. And then Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, so kind of a cloud condensed, as far as I'm aware. I'm not a scientist, but yeah, cloud condensed, and then it formed this sort of kind of hot ball of mass, which eventually cooled down, and then it was a big ocean planet. So for a long time, the Earth was just this big ocean planet. And there were chemical processes going on in this, so that was a whole chemical process that made that happen. But at some point, those chemical processes became so complicated that then organic processes came into being. Yeah, so this is where the earliest life forms emerged. So these are kind of single cell organisms, kind of like bacteria that we have now. And that's where organic processes emerged. So you can see these physical and chemical processes kind of emerged, and then they developed, as they got more complicated, they developed into organic processes. And then from those single cell organisms, they kind of got more and more complicated until basically early life formed. So these are life forms that were able to move around with purpose. They were able to kind of defend resources. They started to procreate. They had systems for detecting light and sound. And then early defense systems emerged. And this is what you might call kind of early instinctual processes. So that's the third layer that I talked about, was these instinctual processes started to emerge. Then after that, life moved on to land, and then reptilian life began. And reptilian life was mainly concerned with kind of moving around and defending resources, threatening other people to stop them, well, not other people, other reptiles from getting their land. And again, kind of mainly concerned with fighting, fleeing, eating, and procreating. That was kind of the main thing that they were into. And then from that, that kept on developing, and then eventually mammals emerged. And this is where kind of the instinctual life got more complicated. So that instinctual life was there, they were being driven by instincts, but then from that, mammalian life emerged. And this was instincts for caring, living in family groups, kind of attachments, that sort of thing. But also tribalism, kind of forming groups and like putting groups against one another. That's what started to emerge with mammals. They were more socially rank aware, so they started being aware of where they pitted against other people, other mammals. And then they also had instincts for cooperation and sharing. So that's kind of the main thrust of this instinctual development. Yes, we've had physical, chemical, we've had organic, then we've had instinctual. And then after that, what's happened is human beings then started to emerge. And at this point, there was a new type of consciousness came into play with human beings. So with human beings, self-reflexive consciousness started to emerge. And this meant that we could abstract and we could conceptualize. So human beings are unique in the fact that they can kind of step out of their experience in their mind and kind of plan ahead, think about what might happen, solve complex problems in their head. And it also, that ability also allows us to imagine. It allows us to kind of create and all of those things. So that's kind of the unique development of human life. But what comes with that as well is this emerging sense of me and I-ness. Yeah, so in Buddhism we talk about this belief in a fixed and separate self, and this is where this began to emerge in this flow of life. So there's this self-reflexive awareness where beings had a sense of, oh yeah, this is me, this is I, this is mine, and also had the ability to reflect on our thoughts, reflect on our feelings, but most importantly, the ability to choose how we act. So as human beings, we have the ability to reflect and then choose how we act. So whereas before, life was just driven by instinct, whereas human beings, we have this unique ability to be able to reflect and choose. And that's going to be really important for what we look at later. Okay, so we've had the emergence now of human beings with self-reflexive consciousness, and then around 2,200 to 2,800 years ago, there was something called what's been coined the axial age, and this is a point where Sanghadharin says that at this point there was a major shift in consciousness, and this was where the capacity to reflect reached a point where kind of basically geniuses started to emerge within civilizations in actually lots of different areas. So it's quite interesting that if you look around, quite independently, really great thinkers started to emerge around the globe in different civilizations. And this produced kind of major spiritual and philosophical breakthroughs. So for example, there was the Buddha, Confucius, Lao Tzu, Socrates, Plato, Pythagoras, all of these people emerged around this time. And in the axial age, what began to happen was that they started to reflect on ethics, basically. They started to have ethical self-reflection. They started to reflect on universal moral principles. They started to look at things philosophically, kind of creating philosophical views on life. And they started to become interested in inner spiritual transformation. So this is basically where human beings started to become conscious or started to reflect on ethical processes. So I mentioned that was the next phase of development. So we had instinctual processes, but the next thing we'll be looking at is ethical processes. And this was the time. So in the axial age, this is when they really started to question what is our place in the world? What are human beings' place in the world? And how can we live in a way that's good? Yeah, how can we live in a way that's kind of beautiful and true? So that was kind of a new level of reflection started to come in, and they started to reflect on ethical processes. And then, so out of this time, there was many spiritual seekers all around the world, but particularly in India, there was a very strong tradition of people basically going in search of the truth. There's different names to them. One's wandering mendicants, which I quite like. It's kind of these people that have left home and they're going in search of the truth. They're practicing different practices because they think that's going to lead them towards the truth. And I don't know what they necessarily thought the truth was at this time, but there was just a sense that there is a way to understand our place in the universe. There is a way to really get to the heart of things, and I want to dedicate my life to doing that. Yeah, so in India there's a really strong tradition of that, and Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, the historical Buddha, he was a part of that tradition. So he was one of those people that went in search of the truth. And he did that. He left home, he went in search of the truth, and after a number of years he gained what we call enlightenment. And this was when he realized the type of consciousness that transcended this sense of me, this sense of I-ness that I talked about. When self-reflexive consciousness emerges and we have this sense of, yeah, I am here, this is me, the Buddha realized a consciousness that was beyond that transcended that. And he saw deeply into the interconnectedness of things. So he saw how all things kind of arise out of a set of conditions and they're all completely interconnected. And this also led to a freedom from all mind-made suffering. Yeah, so not only did he realize how things were, when he realized how things were, when he deeply saw that, it meant that all mind-made suffering disappeared. And what we could, one way of talking about this is transcendental processes. So this is the last stage of the process I'm talking about. It's these transcendental processes. And when he realized this, he saw that it wasn't just that he'd realized it. He saw that other people could too. He saw that other people were able to experience what he experienced. And so he went out and taught other people. And he spent his whole life doing that. And then since the time of the Buddha, that's what's happened. People have passed on these teachings. So the Buddha taught about ethics, he taught about meditation, and he talked about wisdom. And he passed that on to other people who also realised what he realised, these transcendental processes manifested fully in these beings, and they then passed it on to other people. And because that happened from person to person, the teachings of the Buddha have come down to us now. So the Buddha's teachings have stayed alive and vital, and that's why we're here. We're here able to hear these teachings. So this is where we find ourselves. Yeah, this is where we find ourselves. That's kind of giving you a very brief sweep of everything from the Big Bang to the Buddha. That was cool, wasn't it? Yeah. Change the title of the talk. So we've emerged from this flow of conditions. We've emerged, and we live in a universe where kind of the foundation is these physical and chemical processes. These biological processes maintain our body. We're largely driven by instincts, but we also have a capacity to reflect. We also have a capacity to make choices. And we care about having a meaningful life as well, don't we? We care about having a life of meaning. And we have the ability to reflect on our place in the universe and make choices about how we want to live in light of that. Yeah, so we're in this unique place in the universe, and we live in a place where self-transcendence, a path to self-transcendence does exist. Yeah, the Buddha has realised that, and he's taught it, and it's there for us if we want to practice it. So kind of we're in this world where all of these processes are going on, and all of them we can be in alignment with. We can place ourselves in alignment with. So I'm going to talk more in the second half. We'll go more into each one individually and look at how they manifest in our life. So I've kind of given a historical evolutionary overview of it. But also they're relevant for us in making sense of our experience, and that's what we'll look at in the second half. But we're going to do some more meditation now, and what I'm going to recommend doing is we're going to do the mindfulness of breathing, and I'd recommend just trying to have a sense that you're sitting in the flow of all of that. Yeah, so all of that has come before us. All of those conditions have happened so that we are here, or not so that we're here now, but we're here now because of all those things that have happened. And if we can reflect in that way, it can kind of broaden our view on practice. Yeah, so we'll do the mindfulness of breathing and just see if you can have a sense of having emerged from all of these different conditions. Okay, so I mentioned how the teaching of the Niyamas was traditional teaching, but also developed by Sanghadharin. But really what the Niyamas is just a teaching, it's an elaboration on the Buddha's fundamental teaching. So kind of the core of the Buddha's teaching is a teaching called Praticit Samutpada, which is basically that all things arise dependent on a certain set of conditions. So while those conditions arise, that thing remains, and when they cease, that phenomena cease to be. So basically saying all of reality is a flow of conditions. Yeah, things arise when the conditions are right, and they pass away when those conditions cease. So that's true of everything in our outer experience. So anything we can see, hear, taste, touch, all of those things arise dependent on conditions. But also our inner experience. So thoughts, feelings, kind of volitions, they all arise dependent on conditions as well. And this isn't a theory, this kind of fundamental teaching, it isn't a theory. It's just a description of how things are. It's a description of things we can see and know. And everything is part of this flow of conditions. So we looked at, in the first half, we looked at this kind of flow of life, we could say. The emergence of life in the universe, that also depends on conditions. This Praticit Samutpada that the Buddha taught explains this as well. So the emergence of life, the arising of self-consciousness, the emergence of an enlightened being, all of these things can be seen in the light of Praticit Samutpada. And I think an important point with this teaching is that these events are not random. Yeah, so it teaches that there are regularities in the universe, and the events are not random, and they happen in this way. These conditions unfold in this way because there are regularities in the universe. So when we're looking at the Niyamas, we're not looking at kind of things. They're not. It's easy to, when we start talking about it, it's easy to think of them as things, but they're not things. They're descriptions of regularities in the universe. Yeah, hopefully it'll make sense as we go through it. Okay, so we're going to go through the Niyamas now, and I've done a drawing. So I'll show it to you, and you can just spend a couple of seconds taking it in, this wonderful drawing of a mountain that I've done. I meant to do these straight, but I've done them sloped, and it makes it look a bit weird. But yeah, that's my mountain, and yeah. So just as mountains have emerged over billions of years, so we have emerged over billions of years. Yeah. But don't take. I'm just using this as a way to describe it. These teachings aren't about mountains. I'm just using this as a way to kind of help me describe it. Otherwise, it's all a bit abstract. So we're going to go through. I mentioned in the first half these different processes. We looked at I kind of talked through the different processes. Now we're going to look at them with the traditional names to categorize them. If you can't see it, if you want, you could move a bit. But, okay, so we're going to start off at the bottom. So this is Utu Niyama at the bottom. We've got Utu Niyama, and the Utu Niyama is the sum total of regularities found in physical inorganic matter. Yeah, so this is studied by physics and chemistry. We could think about the Utu Niyama as all the processes that are studied in physics and chemistry. So this includes gravity, like I said, thermodynamics, chemical reactions, electricity, structure of atoms, all of those things. And this is kind of like the fundamental regularities of our universe. So I've done this as kind of the ground that the mountain has emerged from. So as we saw, everything kind of emerged from these processes. So these are the foundational regularities of the universe. And from the Utu Niyama, when those processes reached a certain level of complexity, the Bija Niyama emerged. And these are the conditioned relationships relating to living beings. So this is studied by biology, botany, physiology, all those sort of organic biological life forms and the processes that keep them alive. So it's photosynthesis, kind of genetic inheritance, digestion, blood circulating, all of those sorts of things come under Bija Niyama. And then once the Bija Niyama has evolved to a certain level, and I think it's important here, it's not, you wouldn't be able to draw a complete line and say this is where this one starts and this one ends, and they kind of emerge out of each other. So when the Bija Niyama evolved to a certain extent, this is when the Mano Niyama starts to come into play, Mano Niyama processes. And this is, Mano Niyama processes come into play upon kind of sensory perception and instincts. Yeah, so there's sensory perception and instinct. So this is the regularities that govern the animal kingdom, basically. So all the things studied by zoology and behavioural science, that kind of thing. And these govern the processes of perception, reflexes, stimulus response in the mind, and kind of bodily reactions in relation to that, and then instincts. So these three lower niyamas, so Utu Niyama, Bija Niyama, and Mano Niyama, these are all at play within us. Yeah, so we looked in the first half how they kind of govern the emergence of life. And they do that. They emerge sequentially, and they govern the emergence of life, but also they're all at play all the time within us. Yeah, so we all have these processes going on within us, so we can use them as a way to make sense of our experience now. So our bodies, with the Utu Niyama, our bodies are supported and maintained by all sorts of physical and chemical processes. So we're not floating because gravity is working on us, and there's all sorts of chemical reactions going on in our body. So the Utu Niyama is kind of like the foundational thing in our experience. There's then the Bija Niyama. So this governs, so our genetic makeup, we all have different genetic makeup that make us different. So we've got different colour hair, different colour eyes, our bodies are different shapes, all of those sorts of things. How our cells behave, metabolism, digestion, our immune system, all the processes that lead to kind of reproduction, all of those sorts of things. These are all governed by Bija Niyama processes. And then the Mano Niyama processes, this is the level of instinct. We've all inherited instincts from our ancestors all the way back to kind of earliest life. Yeah, so I mentioned a few of those instincts with the different developments, so starting with aquatic life, going to reptiles, going to mammals, all those instincts we're inheritors of. Yeah, so as they emerged, they kind of built on each other, so we've inherited all of those instincts as well. So because of that, we have a capacity to feel threatened. We have a drive towards gaining resources, to protect and gain resources. We have a desire for sex and procreation. We have social instincts, such as a desire to be part of a group and a sense of belonging. So there's all of these instincts at play within us. And also the Mano Niyama is also shaped by experience as well. So particularly in early experiences, that has a strong conditioning effect on us. But also just what we've experienced in our life shapes kind of the responses in Mano Niyama. This is where it starts to blur with the higher level as well, with the Karma Niyama. But for an example, if we had a childhood where we were particularly kind of scared a lot, or we were in danger a lot, on a Mano Niyama level, we'd be much more likely to then experience threat responses later in life. Yeah, so it's kind of conditioned by those things. There's kind of genetic makeup, there's kind of early conditioning, and then there's cultural conditioning as well. So that all shapes Mano Niyama responses. So it's important that we're working on this level as well. So in traditional Buddhism, it talks mainly in this area, Karma and Dharma, which we'll come on to. But it's important that we're also working at this level. It's important that we're also taking into account all of these things. So what I want us to do now is just get into threes or fours, and given what we've talked about so far with those three niyamas, think about how might we work at that level. What might we do? So if we're wanting to develop our minds, it's important that we're working at that level as well. So what might that look like? So you can get into threes and just talk, what might that look like? What things might be helpful at that level, and what things might harm us at that level? And then we can have a bit of a discussion, and I can clarify any questions that you have. So if you want to get into threes, and we'll talk for 5 or 6 minutes. Okay, so what do we think? How might we work at these first three, the level of the first three niyamas, and how might that, what might be helpful at that level, and what might be unhelpful at that level? Yeah.
We started talking about therapy.
Right.
Basically, talking about how the instincts we have are sort of inherited from childhood and create sort of, I think we end up talking about integration, like different selves, different aspects of us which are stuck in different parts of our life.
So what level would that be working at?
I think that's mostly Mano Niyama, as well as, of course, it has a basis in Bija Niyama, with the sort of base biological sort of needs we have, whether they're met or unmet, like sort of has a relationship with our Mano Niyama.
Yeah, so I think that's right. So whether it's through therapy or just through introspection, reflection, or whatever, I think there's some level of learning the shape of our mind, learning what our psychic shape is. Kind of, we all have a different shape to our mind. I keep saying the word shape, but it's quite hard to pin down. But we'll all have particular tendencies, particular things that we're drawn towards, certain things that we tend to do, which seem to just be kind of the shape of us in the way that my hair's brown and things like that. So there's something about getting to know that, but then also there's looking at, okay, what conditions have I had in my life and what have they led me to do? So yeah, that's working at the level of man and niyama. That's definitely part of this, yeah.
Looking after how eating well, sleeping well, etc.
Yeah. So I think the food and sleep is definitely a really important part of this, because once we get to, we'll look at this in a minute, but once we're getting up here, we're looking at how do we make skillful choices, how do we do things where we're cultivating positive mental states and making sure we're choosing the right thing. But actually, if we're not sleeping, if we don't sleep properly, we get grumpy, don't we? We don't have as much control over it. So actually, making sure we've got a good basis in rest and also eating in a way that kind of nourishes and vitalizes the body, that means that we're not then getting stuck with issues at this level that block us from working our way further up. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
In terms of like physics and chemistry,
Mm.
like the environments that we're in,
Mm.
so whether we're able to live in a house that's heated,
Mhm.
or like protect yourself from extreme temperature,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
pollution,
Mm.
or like other like chemicals or
Yeah.
radioactivity.
Yeah, that's really good. So there's kind of the immediate kind of wearing clothes, being in environments where we're not going to be in extreme conditions, but also trying to protect the environment that we live in and try and make sure that we're doing things that lead to that being in a positive state for our life, but other lives as well. Yeah, great. Yeah. Okay, so I think we kind of I've got a few more points, but I think the main thing here is Sanghadharin talks about before we can look towards. Up here we'll start looking at letting go of the self. We need to start with a foundation of a happy, healthy self. Yeah, so we need to become a happy, healthy, integrated, well individual. So actually, when we first start practicing, there'll be lots that we need to do on that level, and it's not. We don't want to neglect that level by thinking, oh, that's not important spiritual stuff. Actually, all of this is kind of foundational for developing more. So. So I had down kind of healthy food, exercise, rest. Kind of the body really likes heat, so we can do that. Sunlight, stretching, laughter, music, nature. All of these things have a positive effect on the level of the bija niyama. Getting to know our psychology, like Suhaib was saying, and then also with the kind of social instinct aspect of it. If we can put ourselves in what we might call positive groups. So these are groups that encourage us to grow. They're groups that will be supportive and kind and caring, but also help us to keep growing and keep transforming. So that will mean that the social instincts that we have won't come up against fear and rejection and ostracization, and we can really be ourselves and really be supported to grow. So there's lots we can do on this area. And then on a strong foundation of that, we can then move towards this next phase of development, like we call it. So when we work our way up the mountain, at this point here, the mountain becomes snow-capped, and what this is representing here, this line, I've put as the self-reflexive consciousness emerges. And like I said, there's not actually a concrete point, but there's a distinct shift here between instinctual consciousness and then self-reflexive consciousness. So karma niyama comes into play with the emergence of self-reflexive consciousness. So this is when we can have an idea of a self as the center of action and experience. So as human beings, we all have this experience where we feel like we are a self in the center of experience, and the karma niyama is a description of the regularities between a self-conscious individual who's capable of making choices and the result or the effects of a conscious action that they take. So I'll say that again. So it's a self-conscious individual and the regularities between them, the choices they make and the effects of that action, basically. So whether that's actions of body, speech and mind, any action has an effect. And so this is the arena of ethics. So the karma niyama is when ethics come into play. And this is what individuals began contemplating and discussing around the axial age that I mentioned in the first half. And the Buddha really succinctly described and accurately described the process that operate in this way under the law of karma. Yeah, so I'm sure you've all heard of the law of karma. But yeah, the Buddha articulated this really specifically. And he said that actions that are based on positive states of mind broadly tend to bring about beneficial effects in the world. Yeah, so if actions come from a positive state of mind, they'll have beneficial effects externally and internally. So they'll lead to pleasant feedback from our surroundings, but they also lead to an inner, greater sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, and a deeper and a more enriched sense of our experience. So that's if we act in a positive state of mind. So, for example, if we act out of kindness, we'll have that'll have a positive effect outwardly, but we'll also feel more satisfied and more fulfilled. And conversely, if we act from a negative state of mind, it will have the opposite effect. Yeah, so if we act out of greed or if we act out of hatred, that will tend to have a negative effect for other people and internally. So we'll get negative feedback, but we'll also have a greater sense of dissatisfaction and suffering. So this is what the karma niyama is describing, is this process of action and effect. Yeah, so every action that we take has an effect, whether it's skillful or unskillful, positive or negative. And so the fact that this is an observable regularity in the universe means that ethics is inherent in the universe. So this would imply that ethics is a natural law in the same way that gravity is. Yes, that's one of the things of looking at it in this way. We're used to seeing that there are certain laws in the universe, but in this way we're looking at it saying that karma or ethics is an inherent law in the universe. So it's implying that reality is inherently ethical. So we're talking about the beginning about how views kind of shape our experience. And if we can really start to see the universe as inherently ethical, that will then change our experience of it. It will change our experience of the world, and it will change the way that we act in the world. So that's one of the reasons why it's important that's one of the reasons why it's helpful to start thinking in this way. And so, if we align ourselves with the karma niyama, if we act from positive states of mind, eventually our mind will be developed, and at some point, the dharma niyama processes will start to unfold. And you can see here, at this point, the mountain point disappears, and this is the point of letting go of ego clinging. So these are the processes that begin to emerge when we let go of ego clinging. So the dharma niyama comprises of all the conditioned processes by means of which a Buddha arises. So it's the dharma niyama processes that mean that it's capable, or that we're able to attain enlightenment, that Buddhahood can be in the universe. And this is particularly represented by the positive factors that arise once we start to gain significant spiritual development. There's positive states that build on each other. And this would also imply that Buddhahood is not a random event. So the fact that it's governed by these laws, the fact there's these regularities in the universe that mean that a Buddha can emerge, this means that it's not a random event. Nor is it inevitable, but it's gained by establishing a sequence of conditions. So if we could just put the appropriate conditions in place, eventually dharma niyama processes would start to come into play, and we will align ourselves with those processes, and we will attain what the Buddha attained. So again, as I was saying with the karma niyama, as reality is inherently ethical, also these transcendental processes are inherent in the universe. So Buddhahood, the ability to attain Buddhahood is inherent in the universe. Okay, so we'll talk in a little bit about moving up it. But are there any questions so far? I just want to pause here. I know I've said quite a lot, so I just want to pause in case there are any questions.
What does the reflexive part of self-reflexive consciousness?
So it's that we're able to kind of, in our minds, step outside of ourselves and see us in the world and reflect on our place in the world and think about, oh, what could if I do this, that will lead to that.
Is it reflective or reflective?
Yeah, it's the same sort of
It's the
thing.
same
Yeah. So yeah, it's something about knowing ourselves as part of experience. Whereas a dog wouldn't think, I'm a dog and I'm here doing this. It just kind of does dog things. Whereas we're able to kind of stand apart from ourselves, understand us in the middle of things, and then make choices about that. If that makes sense. Yeah. Another one. Yeah.
If the Dharma and Niyama is transcendental,
Mm.
that means, but it's on the top of the thing, so everything, it's all caused by all the things below it, but it is transcendental. Does that mean it's also encompassing the physical stuff as well?
I guess that's where my diagram probably breaks down. We don't want to take this too literally. But kind of what it's getting at is there's like an upward movement. Well, you could, yeah, that's a way of thinking about it, is there's an upward movement towards it. Yeah, I don't want to talk. I could kind of go on about the mountain, but I kind of don't really want to talk about the mountain too much. Yeah. But yeah, kind of once the Dharma Niyama processes are at play, there's much less sense of a self, so that the consciousness would be much more expansive. Yeah.
In terms of letting go of ego, is the idea that that process of letting go of the ego is conditioned on knowledge of ethics, and that process of losing the ego is itself a condition for transcendentalism, or is the process of letting go of the ego almost independent of the ethics, which was words?
So I guess at this level, when we're looking at karma niyama processes, if we're looking at moving from here to here, ethics as we normally think of it, like following the precepts, that's part of it. But then there's also meditation, developing positive states of mind, and there's reflecting on wisdom teachings, kind of reflecting on the way things are. And that the Buddha taught that there's particular ways that we can reflect that will lead us to letting go of clinging. And if we do them, then that starts to lead to this letting go of clinging. So on the basis of a mind that's been kind of purified and refined through ethics and meditation, the wisdom teachings can actually start to take root and drop in. Yeah.
Can I ask, what do you mean by reality is inherently ethical?
So the fact that we can all experience that if we act with positive states of mind, that will lead to a positive inner experience and outer experience, and vice versa. That seems to be the case for all beings, all human beings who have self-reflexive consciousness. That seems to be the case. So it implies that there's something of this in reality.
So like we're programmed to want to help others.
Yeah. That'd be one way of talking about it. Yeah. So consciousness thrives when it's acting for others and with others, and it suffers when it acts against others and separates itself from others. I guess that'd be another way of talking about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll move on to the next bit. So we've kind of had the whole sweep, and this teaching encompasses kind of all of reality. Yeah, so we could see all of these processes encompass all of reality. But these first three are part of what Sanghadharin calls the lower evolution. And what he means here, he doesn't. It's not a derogatory term saying lower evolution, but what this means is that these three niyamas emerged kind of instinctually or non-consciously. So when bacteria turned into living organisms and living organisms turned into fish, etc., they weren't thinking, oh, I'm trying to grow. It just naturally happened. Those processes naturally led to one another. And so this whole growth from here to here was involuntary. But at the point where self-reflexive consciousness emerges, it changes. So to grow from this point here, this is what Sanghadharin calls the beginning of the higher evolution. And in the Karma Niyama, what we need to do is, it's a stage of voluntary growth or conscious growth. So we'd use our will, we'd use our intentional will to try and act in a way that will lead to more and more positive states of mind. Yeah, so we'll use our will to try to act kindly. We'll use our will to try and act generously, to live a more contented and simple life, to tell the truth, to speak harmoniously. Those things don't necessarily naturally happen. We need to use our will to try and make sure we're acting in that way. And then at this point here, so from here to here, there's a voluntary growth, there's a deliberate growth. But at this point here, where the Dharma Niyama starts to emerge, there's a spontaneous unfoldment. So at this point here, the sense of self is transcended. There's the kind of egoic will, as we might call it, falls away because there isn't a sense of an ego. But the mystery and the magic of this stage is that there's still something driving us. There's still something driving us forward. So at this stage, it's kind of a spontaneous unfoldment of more and more positive states of mind. So we're kind of in the grip of, or taken over by, or emerges within us, this sort of non-egoic will that spontaneously unfolds and leads to higher and higher states of consciousness. So we have a choice how to act. So we're all at this stage here, and we have a choice how to act. And we can either choose to act driven by instincts. So we're all still going to have instincts that are driving us. So we're all still going to have, and our instincts, they're largely about survival. Yeah. So we've lived this long as a species because we've had instincts that helped us survive. So a lot of our instincts will be based on survival. So it's not that they're bad; they've kept our species alive. But often our instincts will lead us to act selfishly. So we'll have kind of a desire to accumulate things and hold on to things ourselves. We won't want to give them away. We'll feel angry and we'll feel hateful if we feel threatened by things. So these things are all still at play in us. And in a way, we need to bring as much awareness to that part of ourselves as we can. And we need to consciously, if we want to develop in the way that I've described, we need to consciously make effort to, be aware of them, but also transcend them. So, like I said, making choices to be kind, to be generous. And it's not that when we experience instincts that are more selfish, it's not that they're bad or wrong or we should be ashamed of them, but we do need to just acknowledge that they're there and try and not be overly led by them. And like I was saying, I was talking earlier, so this stage is primarily about ethics, meditation and wisdom. Yeah, so how are we acting? What are we doing with our minds in meditation to cultivate more and more positive mental states? And once we have this kind of refined, positive, pliable mind from ethics and meditation, we can then start to reflect in a way that will stop this clinging. So we're all habitually clinging to ourselves and what we identify with. But on the basis of cultivating a positive state of mind, we can start to look in a way that will lead to a releasing of that clinging. Yeah, and that's where the Dharma Niyama processes really start to come through. And I think one of the problems with this diagram is it looks like, okay, karma, karma, niyama, Okay, and then at some point, just Dharma Niyama. But in reality, that's not what it would be like. Insight starts off as just flashes. Yeah, so you might be on retreat, you might be in meditation, then there might just be a flash of seeing things much more clearly. Or you might just be walking in nature, and then all of a sudden your awareness just expands to beyond anything you've experienced before, and then quickly it will close back down. So at first, Dharma Niyama processes would just come in flashes. But the more we can establish our mind in these positive mental states, the more we can follow this path of ethics, meditation and wisdom, we'll start to be led more and more by those insights, by those kind of moments of perfect vision. We'll be led more and more by them, and less by our instincts. And eventually, like I said before, it's as if we'd be being led by a force that's much greater than ourselves. At this point, we can only really get poetic, can't really describe it. But it's said to be a will that's not our will. So one way of talking about it is a suprapersonal force. So it's a force that flows through us, but isn't us. Yeah, so it's greater than us, but it drives us. And yeah, I think I can't really describe this one because I'm not dwelling in this to describe it. But also it's kind of beyond words at this point. So what I'm going to finish with is just a poem by Sanghadharin that kind of describes this suprapersonal force in an image, because I think that will get it much more than I could possibly try and conceptualize it. So yeah, we've just got a couple of minutes. So why don't you sit quietly for a couple of minutes, and then I'm just going to read out this poem, and you can let the poem sink in. Okay, and I'll read it 2 times just so we can let it really sink in. The wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer by the hour. I do not know from whence it came or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me, its breath my breath, its will my will. The wind. A wind was in my sails. It blew stronger and fiercer by the hour. I do not know from whence it came or why. I only knew its power. Sometimes it dashed me on the rocks. Sometimes it spun me round and round. Sometimes I laughed aloud for joy. Sometimes I felt a peace profound. It drove me on, that manic wind, when I was young. It drives me still, now I am old. It lives in me, its breath my breath, its will my will.